Welcome to ITI's podcast. We call it Download on Tech. ITI is the global trade association of the technology industry, representing the world's technology innovators. When you listen to episodes of Download on Tech, you'll hear from the world's technology innovators. Leaders at the most innovative companies, policymakers, and influencers from around the world. Our guests share their perspective on the intersection of innovation and public policy. Today, we're excited to welcome Brie, who is Senior Vice President and Head of Government Affairs at Siemens US. Now, Brie brings over 2 decades of expertise in local, state, and federal government operations. And at Siemens, she leads a team driving a robust legislative and policy agenda that supports business priorities across infrastructure, manufacturing, transportation, economic development, and workforce. Brie has also played a critical role in shaping strategic partnerships and influencing outcomes that impact Siemens's reputation and its ability to operate efficiently. Brie, welcome to Download on Tech.
Thank you, Jason. It's great to be with you this morning.
Well, it's great to have this opportunity to talk at a very consequential time in technology policy. Of course, we have a new administration that is literally just weeks old. We have a new Congress that's just a couple weeks older than that. And we have an opportunity to really influence a brand new policy landscape that's focused on growth and innovation, which I know is the Siemens mantra and which what we're going to talk about today. So let's just dive right in and talk about what we can hope for activity from the new administration. They're very busy already. First 100 days is what we used to talk about. Now we're talking about the first 100 hours. But let's take a step back and be deliberative in our recommendations to the administration. What are your thoughts on some really actionable steps in the first 100 days of the new Trump administration that can really support innovation and tech?
Yeah, well, absolutely. I think you said it appropriately, right? Where we talk about the first 100-day agenda, we're just weeks in. And there's been a flurry of activity, a lot of action that has already happened. I think opportunities already seeing around AI, right? And what we have an opportunity to sort of reset with the administration, Congress, and as you all know, even at the state level, right, on things like AI regulations. And I know we'll talk a little bit about that later. But in line with ITI's policy roadmap, I think what are those things from fueling innovation, driving economic prosperity, technology? I think the technology sector is playing already, having more of a seat at the table with this administration, which we're really pleased to see. You know, at Siemens, we are an industrial technology company. So behind the scenes, when you think of infrastructure, technology, transportation, manufacturing, really across the board. And so different from maybe some of the consumer to consumer issue sets. So we're really pleased and look forward to having more discussions, open discussions in depth with the administration and its experts. I think looking at, right, David Sachse as an AI and crypto czar, even some of the appointments and the experts that the administration has put in place has been something that we're tracking closely and really hoping that we can move forward. I think we've already had conversations as an industry with folks from the Office of Science and Technology Policy, right? So when we look at whether it's R&D, of course, workforce, we know this administration's focused on manufacturing, government efficiency. So I think what is the technology role there in helping achieve those national priorities? I think finding that digital thread is something that we're looking at advancing and hopeful to see from this administration.
Yeah, it's interesting you noted the willingness of the new administration to engage with industry. That's a refreshing change, and I would certainly echo your sentiment that we have a real opportunity to have those discussions with the new Trump administration and help them understand the connection between the policy decisions they make and the ability of technology manufacturers to succeed in the US. So I wanted to ask you to kind of drill down a little bit more on that intersection of policy and business. What are kind of the key tech priorities that Siemens sees as critical for business success and global competitiveness, kind of that roadmap that you're going to be suggesting to the administration?
Absolutely. Well, look, I think as maybe even taking out the tech sector, but as business. So for Siemens, we've been in the United States for 160 years, 45,000 employees. We have about 12,000 suppliers. Um, and through that time, we've worked with government stakeholders, local, state, and federal. I think for us, we clearly want to look at the freedom to operate. We want certainty, right, as we look at making investment decisions. We've invested in the last, since 2007, about $20 billion. We have more investment on the board right now in the United States than we ever have in my 12 years being here and talking about manufacturing expansions, R&D investment. We have our US R&D hubs. So I think as business, we clearly want to make sure global competitiveness, fair and level playing field, lots of debate. I know you might tax Super Bowl or Taxapalooza, all the buzzwords. But looking at that from a corporate perspective, right, and what that means for the company, investing in workforce. There's a lot of discussion around AI. And the threat to the workforce, but this is really, Siemens' perspective is really about how do we bring people along? What is the role of technology enabling? What's humanly possible? And so I think looking at what are the frameworks, whether that's legislation, policy, investment, federal agencies, but also that really gets down to the state and local level, but to help drive that. So I think some of the things that we're tracking there, of course, AI, I talked about this, it feels a little bit maybe a whack-a-mole that could be coming on with states starting to move individually around AI policy. So being able to look at, of course, all the right words around harmonization or, what needs to move at a federal level versus as a manufacturer of technology, when you start to have a patchwork of different regulations, that's certainly a challenge. So I don't know, throwing a couple different things out there for you.
Yeah, and you mentioned at the outset that it's really important for the administration to remember that although the use cases of AI that consumers think about are fun and productive, the industrial use cases of AI are equally, if not more important, for economic competitiveness globally. So I wanted to ask you about a couple of areas, AI and cybersecurity in the tech landscape, and how Siemens brings a different perspective than the consumer-facing service providers, which obviously are a very important component of the AI story. But the industrial component of the AI and cybersecurity story just, frankly, just isn't talked about quite as much. And Siemens is at the center of this. So with the new administration taking on AI, as you noted, appointing a new AI czar and bringing back an AI expert to run OSTP, the Office of Science and Technology Policy, but also focused on the cyber threats that we face. Yeah. I wonder if you can just focus on those two issues, AI and cybersecurity, and tell me a little bit about the policy recommendations that you're going to be focusing on in the coming weeks and months.
Sure. Well, I think when we talk about industrial AI, right, we're looking at kind of machine to machine, right? And when you're containing the data, so for us, think about a plant floor factory and how we might also use AI, we call with Microsoft the industrial co-pilot. So you may have a worker on the plant floor with a handheld device that has co-pilot downloaded in a native language, and instead of where you might have to stop a line and start entering, manually entering in a work order or a ticket, it actually is trained in the language, and you do your voice transcription in, and it automates the ticket, right? I know that's a really basic application of it, but how are there ways to work smarter, not harder, in sort of this machine-to-machine data that would be isolated in a plant environment? And so looking at those types of tools, candidly, we've used AI going back to probably the 80s in a host of what Siemens does as a technology company. So I think different issue sets, of course, you want safety, security, the right guardrails, but not having those kind of unintended consequences from an AI perspective. I think for the administration, as we're looking at cybersecurity, and again, thinking about wearing sort of my manufacturing hat as a technology partner across so many industries, it's the secure by design approach. We want to make sure, again, harmonization and even the regulatory landscape internationally and how we're looking at cyber standards. And I think cyber threats, right? What's that coordination? What's the cyber incident reporting? But for us, cyber is kind of table stakes. I mean, that's if you're providing technology and cyber is not baked in. I think there's examples where Siemens in the past has stepped up from not waiting for government to regulate, but what we believe is industry. So several years ago, we implemented what's called the Charter of Trust, but kind of lays out our tenets as what industry should be responsible for in terms of cyber, data privacy, AI, that sort of thing. So I think it's also the role not just of government, but industry equally as we navigate that.
And it's interesting you talked about that public-private partnership because it's obviously important in what we've been discussing, the role of policy in the ability of companies to deploy their services successfully. But the government is also a big client of Siemens and the rest of the technology industry. So that public-private partnership is important, not only for the private sector facing services that the ITI membership offers, right, but also equally, if not perhaps more importantly, the ability of the technology industry to work directly in partnership with the private sector and government together. And you've had a great career in government yourself before coming to Siemens more than a decade ago. So having worked in both the private and the public sector, I wonder if you can share your perspective on how we tell the story, if you will, to the government about the important work that the private sector does and the partnership and how the public and private sector can maybe learn from each other even and right, collaborate together on these issues that you're talking about and more. What's the perspective you bring on that?
So one, Siemens, as I mentioned, we have a lot of investment on the board. So right now we are expanding or building new greenfield factories in California, Texas, North Carolina, Wisconsin. I mean, just a ton of investment. And we look at infrastructure, electrical manufacturing. We partner with labor. We partner with academia, all different. There's not a one size fits all. But I think for Siemens, we literally are woven into the fabric of so many communities in the US, but worldwide. But the common formula for us is not just public-private, but really industry, academia, and government. And so when you think whether it's tackling workforce, training, hiring, lifelong learning there, preparing that workforce, whether we're looking at the infrastructure required, or some of the things we think about as we're even looking at our investment. So having that strong local, state, federal government side of things, but also as industry, where do we need to make investments? So our factories, I failed to mention New York, but our two transportation factories that we're building in New York and North Carolina were both intentionally selective in part because we needed access to a rail spur to actually ship product, right? And I know that sounds really narrow, but just an example where a modernized infrastructure matters and having world-class infrastructure matters as we think about investment decisions as companies. We know this administration is very focused on seeing more U.S. manufacturing. We think we're well positioned to support that mission and already are. But I do think that role of government and industry and making it a business-friendly place, right? And permitting, of course, I think is a big congressional, federal priority. How do we, regulatory rollback, streamline permitting, but thinking about, what are the tools that can also make it easy when we have these market demands in all forms of sectors for manufacturing in the U.S. And we've got to get these factories up online. We have to get the workers trained. So I just use that maybe as a real life example when companies are looking at decisions. It's both industry and government, and then in some cases where we're partnering with the community colleges at the state with state agencies, but how to even custom build, all of these programs, but to reduce the barriers to get up and running. I've been on both sides of that of recruiting companies, and then as we're soliciting, where should we be setting up operations? But I think just that dual perspective, and we need everyone at the table.
It is a great reminder as the Trump administration focuses on investing in manufacturing in the US that it is also important to focus on the global supply chain, because as much as Siemens does here in the US and has done in the US, as you noted, for more than a century and a half, it is still important that US companies and multinational companies take advantage of global supply chains and also the opportunity to sell products and services around the world to be successful as well. So your description of the investment decisions that are made and will continue to be made, it's so influenced by not only the economics, but also the policy environment.
Absolutely. I 100% agree. I think right, ITI, you've been over a century in existence. So I think as you're even looking what's happening in the EU, what's happening worldwide, what is that part of the global competition is absolutely the technology and the policy landscape. It's the regulatory landscape. When we look at tax, right, it's all about that level playing field, but ultimately it's kind of a race of who's going to be the most maybe business friendly. At Siemens, you're right, we were founded in 1847 as a startup in Berlin, Germany. We are now operating in nearly every country worldwide, but are really proud of our presence here. Again, the investment that we're making here, and really the role of foreign direct investment as a force multiplier, whether that's jobs, supply chain. Some of our projects that we've worked on in the recent years, we have actually helped stand up suppliers and scale and help them grow as a part of components, whether it was train sets or electrical infrastructure. So we're really proud of that force multiplier and the role that FDI, we call it foreign direct investment, can play here in the US. And I think, the president, trying to think, it was a couple months ago, right, announced the billion-dollar investments of rolling out the red carpet to help major projects. And I think, his eye to that view of attracting the U.S., attracting that kind of capital, international and U.S. capital, is the right approach.
And Siemens is a great embodiment of that. I mean, it is interesting to think there's so many Americans, millions of Americans who get on trains every day who don't realize the policy decisions and the economic environment that led to that manufacturing happen here in the U.S.
Yeah.
It is pretty remarkable to think about. So on the subject of the roadmap, or I guess I should say where the train tracks are leading us, I wanted to ask you for your 2025 roadmap. It's been a very busy start to the year. I've heard some people say that January was the longest year of 2025 the 4 weeks that seem to last 4 months because there's so much going on and so much excitement and so much enthusiasm for the path ahead. So what's on your radar? Maybe if I can ask you to make some predictions about where the biggest opportunities lie for 2025. And we've been talking about how Siemens technology is everywhere. It's ubiquitous, but you have more to do and more growth ahead. So it'd be great to hear how you'll be lending your expertise to this evolving landscape.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I think, first I'll say on my ability to predict, if I could totally get my crystal ball out, I wouldn't actually be talking to you on this podcast, Jason. I think I would be like sipping margaritas elsewhere on vacation if I could really predict with 100% certainty. But look, we talked a little bit about transportation infrastructure. I think for Siemens, and we've seen this, the conversation that's happening congressionally, in the administration, and at the state and local level with government leaders around energy. And so we've talked a lot about AI, the role of the tech sector, things moving to the cloud, cyber, but that need for power is what's going to drive all of that. I mean, when you're talking about data centers that are, 10x, huge, power consumers, Siemens is well positioned to help make more state-of-the-art energy efficient data centers, supporting the grid and the needs there, the hardware and the software. But I do think that's a topic of big conversation that we'll see this year. We've already seen that front and center with the new administration, with the prior administration. I think as we're looking at, ITI, right, you just stood up your energy infrastructure working group, but I think that need for power will be front and center, and how we tackle that again as industry, but as government. What's the right policy landscape? Are there investments? What's the right way to tackle that? And we're seeing states do that as well. So I think that's one space. in terms of national priorities, predictions for this year, I think we've talked a little bit about US manufacturing. So I think where that goes, I'd put maybe under the umbrella of manufacturing infrastructure. There's clearly discussions right now, there's freezes and pauses on funding, which, a lot of those things are maybe standard operating procedure for a new administration to look at different funds and programs. But I do think it'll be incredibly important as we look at the Inflation Reduction Act, prior infrastructure investments, where we're seeing those in maybe red states. There's just been so much movement, whether it's battery manufacturing, other types of energy related manufacturing. I think that's going to be critical to continue down that path. There might be some inflections or tweaks to things, but I think that's incredibly important as we're driving to the broader policy objective of more US manufacturing. So I'd say those are a couple big picture ones. I mean, I don't know. What do you think about AI? Do we think we're going to have comprehensive AI federal legislation this year? I don't know. I think a lot of conversations. I don't know. What do you think?
A lot of conversations, certainly. And I was very pleased to see OSTP release its request for input from industry on the AI action plan for the new Trump administration. We're kind of starting from scratch and need a new executive order with guidance. But President Trump jumped right in, literally on the second day, with his desire to analyze and ensure that the U.S. remains the global leader in AI. So with the new OSTP inquiry and their solicitation, as you noted, their interest in hearing from industry, I think we'll have a great opportunity to move forward quickly there. And then we've seen some great interest both on the Senate side and the House in AI. And whether there's a need for legislation or not, I think remains to be seen. But certainly the industry is looking forward to continuing those discussions and testifying before the relevant committees about AI. And we'll see where that goes. But a lot of activity, a lot of interest. But the good news is the industry is not waiting, and we're moving forward very quickly. So it's an exciting time. And all of the issues you mentioned, energy policy, cybersecurity, AI, global competitiveness. We haven't even talked about the tax landscape and the need for Congress to get to work there. A lot going on, a lot of activity, a lot of excitement and enthusiasm about the road ahead, and a really great conversation today, Brie. So thank you for taking the time to share your view and help us understand the important work that's ahead.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for having me. And we appreciate the good work of ITI and all the support in representing the voice of the tech sector in Washington and beyond.
Well, thank you. And we're proud to represent Siemens and a great industry, and looking forward to a great 2025 together. Our guest today has been Brie Sachse, who is Senior Vice President and Head of Government Affairs at Siemens US. And thank you for joining us on ITI's Download on Tech podcast. You can find future episodes on our website, itic.org, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. I'm Jason Oxman, ITI's President and CEO, and I look forward to connecting with you next time.